What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another live Q&A. I'm Brandon Rust, owner and CEO of Full Crop Science. Today, who knows what we're going to be talking about. We'll wait for a couple more people to join the chat and figure out what the topics are going to be for today. Always cultivation related, agronomy, science, microbiology, all of the good stuff that we love. Let's see here. What's up, Space Cactus? What's going on, everybody? KCMO in the house. Hope everybody's having a good day. Got a little bit of this high divorce rate crossed to limelight, which I actually have a bunch drying right now. Harvested last night. ChemDog, Black D, ChemDog BLR, high divorce rate limelight, all that good stuff. If you guys got any questions, drop them in the chat below. We're here at the office. Got all the orders packed up this morning. Lots and lots of seed orders going out. We have the nice big old bag. Clean these up. The Berry Bad Dog, which I got to get packaged up. There's the, everybody hates on the AI, but I enjoy it. I have fun with it. It does a lot of things that I couldn't personally do. Berry Bad Dog, which is ChemDog crossed to Blueberry Train Mac F2 male. And then I took females from that line, which is this right here. I did a little bit of line work on this. And then I crossed this into a male Blueberry Train Mac F3. So it's ChemDog, Blueberry Train Mac F2 crossed to Blueberry Train Mac F3. These are all sold out. These went fast. People are really loving those old school acrid terps, but the line work is going to be coming out in a couple of months, actually. I've got some seedlings around yay big. I should be getting my Farmer Freeman sex tests in the mail today. I'll send those out tomorrow. And then I'll uppot all of the females. So this is in testing right now. But I probably will be doing some of these pre-release as freebies because I have been putting in packs with all seed orders. So I've been throwing in these right here, which are Starfighter cross to Miracle Alien Cookie. These are F2s, originally bred by Capulator. Didn't want to sell F2s of somebody else's work, so just giving them out as freebies with orders. And then we also had the Trainwreck Blueberry MK Ultra crossed to ChemDog Black Lime Reserve, and those are also in the queue for freebies as well. Here's a good question. It says from chat, have the male in sex test been 100% correct for you? Any germ issues? Or do they find that? They don't look at germination issues. They strictly identify male and female chromosomes. Now, I've probably done at least 2,000, maybe more than that, but I've done at least 2,000 of those tests. And I have only ever had one incorrect test. So I think that's like 0.025% incorrect. So they're accurate for most, almost 99.98% of the time. I've only ever had one that was incorrect. I've always used Farmer Freeman. I've been using his sex tests, I think, since he started. I remember back in 2021, I did a huge pheno hunt, and right off the rip, we did like 500. And then when I first got here in 2019, I did a huge hunt that was like 250 plants. And then throughout the years, I'll go grab up 100 here, 100 here, 40 here, 60 here. Here. Holy Toledo asks, I got the Farmer Freeman sex test too. Nice. How many weeks do you wait to test? So you can test with when they have their first set of true leaves. This is as early as I typically go. If I'm removing the cotyledon, which is the cotyledon are the first leaves. They're basically the embryo leaves. They're the leaves that grow, that are in the embryo that grow. So they're the round first set of leaves. When you have your first set of true leaves coming out, you can go ahead and remove that cotyledon, and you can use that cotyledon as your sex test and put it in the envelope. So pretty early, as long as they have that, they need those cotyledons the first, 5 to 7 days, however fast they're growing, because those cotyledons are what have the amino acids stored in there, all of the different nutrients. And so what happens is when your seed starts to germinate, when it comes in contact with water, the seed actually starts to catabolize amino acids for NADPH, FAD, and ATP. And those are used for biological energy, right? And so that's what gets the seed to go. That's what powers the seed pre-photosynthesis. As long as you have enough biomass to be able to capture light, you can remove that cotyledon and send that in as your biomass sample for the sex test. So you can do them pretty early. And then as far as the return time, it usually takes about 4 to 5 business days. So he's pretty quick about it, about getting those test results back to you. Here's a question from Jason Mans. He says, what's your thoughts on male plants that show sacs early in flower? Keep and grow out to see what they bring to the table, or straight up trash them? So when I'm doing a male selections, I do not, okay, there's a couple of things that I look at. First, I'm looking at the morphology of the plant, because oftentimes what you'll see is male plants are taller and lengthier. And the reason why they do that is they want to be above the females, because they want to drop their pollen. That pollen's going to, it'll float everywhere, but they want to be above those plants so that they can drop those pollen on the female stigmas, so they can reproduce. Now, I don't like to use males that are tall. And the reason why is because when I'm looking at the morphological structure of a male plant, I want things that have short internodal space. I want them to be axillary dominant. So I don't want them to be apical dominant to where they like to go straight up. What I like to see is a lot of lateral side branching. So I select for that. Overall vigor and health. And then one of the things that I do is I stress them. So if they become root bound or deficient in nitrogen, oftentimes does it, they will pre-flower. If I see any type of pre-flowering on a male plant in veg, then I don't use them. So that's one of the ways you really have to stress them to test this. Now, the other thing that I'm looking at when I'm selecting males is I'm looking at the leaf morphology too, to see if it matches, if it's identical to the female morphology. Those are two things that I like to compare. And then when you're flowering those out, males that produce trichomes are great to use because they're going to, um, oftentimes they bring that characteristic into the line. Like they keep that. If it's a really, really trichome laden plant and you get them and your male has that, it's a good thing. Things that are easy to clone. If things don't clone well, I won't keep them. I won't keep them at all if they're like really finicky when it comes to cloning. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine. But when it comes to males, the only real way to be able to see what that male brings in is if you take a bunch of different things, a bunch of different females, and use that male, and you grow out the progeny from all of those different lines. Oftentimes, you'll be able to see the morphological characteristics that come into that line. But again, this is one of those things like, because I don't do a tons of different crosses. The only males that I have used are Black Lime Reserve, Trainwreck Blueberry MK Ultra, and Starfighter and Mac. There's a couple other things are some like offlines, like the Lime 1 BX crosses, but I don't cycle through tons of different male plants because usually I find a really good male that meets all those requirements. And because I'm using one single male on multiple different lines and I'm growing out all of those lines, I get a really good idea. Like that BLR male. That BLR male would bring in like the trop lime, which is kind of like that candy methyl anthranilate, but it also had this really earthy kind of, I want to say, kind of like Kush thing going on with it. But it's really important. What up, Marcus? Chilbert, Yellow Skunk Farms. Good to see you in here. Trent's got a garden. I know Chilbert's out in the UK. Cheers from across the pond. There is the Albanian Stardog crew has access to the Blueberry Train Mac out there in the UK, which I thought was pretty cool. There's a couple people out there running it. Okay, back to sex testings. Good Quality asks, I didn't catch it if you said if it's expensive to get sex tests done. So it's really inexpensive. Typically, they run usually between $10 and $12 a piece. And you might be able to get them a little bit cheaper than that, but it just depends on the quantity that you purchase. So if you're buying like 1,000 of them, you might be able to get them for like $8 or $9 a piece. It just depends. I'm not saying that. I have to actually look. His prices are listed, but I know they're between $10 and $12 depending on quantity. But you might be able to get more if you get like 2,000, 3,000 at a time. What's up, J-Pot? Another Full Crop Sciences organic soil grower. Sally Coat, So Caliber 33. Here's a comment. It says, also, if your male plant shows any trichomes, that's an intersex trait. Don't use them. I don't know. I would, in my experience, I've seen really, really trichome laden stuff. I've seen stuff from Gage Green Group. I've also seen stuff from Fresh Coast, and their genetics are solid. I've grown out both of those people's stuff. I don't know if it is an NS. I'd have to look into that more, actually. In my experience, it hasn't been, but But when it comes to early flowering males, because I think that was the initial question, I don't mind if they flower early. If they start, flowering really quickly, I don't mind that. The thing is, I just don't want them to flower while I'm in veg. And again, just doing those tests, we get them root bound, get them nitrogen deficient. Here's another question from the comments. Do you have any tips to cure root rot? Yeah. So the first thing that I would typically do is dryback. I would do a dryback. You want to avoid using things like molasses or carbohydrates, because those pathogens will also feed on those carbohydrates. So that's one of the things I tell people. And then a microbial inoculant like trichoderma and bacillus is a really good consortium that we'll have back in stock a couple more days. And things like Microbe Plus, which is on sale right now, 30% off. It's a multifunctional soil probiotic. So inoculating your media, I always inoculate my media pre-plant, and I use the Microbe Plus every couple of weeks throughout the phase of growth and then I cut it off a couple of weeks before I finish. But that can help. But there is a problem, so if you've got root rot, okay, if it's caused by overwatering, like anaerobic conditions, and your plants aren't dying but they're suffering, you might be okay. But if you get something like fusarium, right, where things look good and then you flip, for instance, right, nothing's really changed, you change the light schedule, all of a sudden you have half the plant dying or something like that. I've seen all different scenarios with fusarium, or just the whole plant just dies and it's dead within a matter of like 24 or 48 hours. I've had plants outdoors that's happened, that were in native ground, and then a storm came through, got super wet, the soil didn't dry out fast enough. So that's usually the number one issue. But also microbes, having beneficial probiotics, things, and then also things like bacillus and the trichoderma. If you're dealing with something like fusarium, that is another issue entirely, because fusarium doesn't just live in the soil and infect from outside. Fusarium is endophytic, so it will actually colonize the vascular transport tissue in the xylem. And you could have fusarium, and I have another theory I'll get into in a second. You could have fusarium and it's not showing any symptomology, and then all of a sudden maybe something changes, right? And then it becomes viral and it causes the symptomology, it starts attacking the plant, and then your plant dies. You could also have fusarium where it doesn't do much damage. It's only, it's like one of the situations where you're trying to figure out why it's taking so long for your roots to root, for your clones to root. Where it's like, oh, these things were rooting in 7 days before, now it's taking 11, 12, 14 days. You can't figure out what's going on, you haven't changed anything, scratching your head. You might have fusarium in a mom, and that mom's healthy, right? But what ends up happening is it's affecting the plant physiologically, and so it's affecting the way that it can produce those roots from that clone. And when we're talking about fusarium specifically, it's one of those things that, like, to get rid of it, you can't just treat the outside of the plant, right? You either have to fight it endophytically with other endophytic microorganisms. I think that would work, but I haven't seen any science yet, right? So they just confirmed what I've been saying for a long time about trichoderma and bacillus subtilis, right? They just confirmed it in cannabis at CanMed, and they're talking about how those will also colonize the vascular transport systems of the xylem as well. And so if you get beneficial microbes that are endophytic, they have the ability to potentially fight those things off. But fusarium, if your plant's colonized and it has fusarium and it's endophytic, you have to get meristem tissue culture done, and oftentimes a Gen 0 culture is not enough. You have to basically meristem the tissue culture, let it grow out, meristem that, let it grow, meristem that. And sometimes it can take multiple sessions of meristem tissue culture to clean that thing up from fusarium. But, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So beneficial microbes are the way that I go about it. And then, you know, proper nutrition will go a long way. Making sure you have adequate silica sources is really helpful, adequate micronutrient and calcium. All those things are really important. Just reading some of these questions, trying to catch up on the comments. If you guys got a question, just put it in the chat. I'll do my best to answer it. You purchased the master bundle. We're just waiting a couple more days and we should have those spores that'll go out. So this is from chat from American Cheddar Cheeks. He says, I thought the formation of trichomes was for a female to capture pollen. Now, the part of the plant that actually captures pollen is called the stigma. It's oftentimes referred to as the pistil. And if you look at that under the microscope, it's feathered. So it's not just one solid thing. It is one thing that is completely three-dimensional, and it has all that feathering, right? That's what's capturing your pollen. The trichomes are basically a defense mechanism that carry you know, like the cannabinoids and different terpenes, which could repel or attract pollinators. They could be used as defense chemical. They're basically defense chemicals is what trichomes are. And trichomes aren't just, you know, something that you see in cannabis. A really good example that I'm sure many of you guys have seen if you've grown tomatoes. If you look at the stalks and the leaves of tomatoes, you'll see trichomes as well. It's why they feel so spiky, you know, those stalks, because they also have trichomes. This is a really good question. Should I pH the Agsil 16 for foliars? What pH would be too high? So, Agsil 16 is potassium silica. It is a water-soluble form of potassium and silica. Now, the cool thing about the Agsil 16 is when you put it into solution, you're typically not going over 10.5, 11 pH, which is alkaline, but it's typically not caustic to the plant. And so you don't have to worry about pH when you're doing a foliar application. You do, however, have to worry about water quality, right? Because your pH of your water, if that is high or if that is low, it's an indication there's something in that water that may need to be filtered out. The potassium silicate will drastically increase the pH of neutral water or even low pH water, but it's safe to spray without pHing. And actually, you get a benefit from that too, because if you look at Agsil 16, it's not just used as a fertilizer, it's also used as an organic listed foliar fungicide. And the reason why is because that high pH creates conditions on the phyllosphere, the surface of the leaf, that's non-conducive to a huge variety of different types of bacteria and fungus. And I've seen literature that shows that you can treat powdery mildew with Agsil 16. Now, obviously, this isn't something that you would want to do in flowering. You wouldn't want to spray potassium silicate on your flower. But, if you're growing, food crops or squash, which, zucchini, they're really prone, cucumbers, they're all prone to powdery mildew, pumpkins, stuff like that. It's a really good way to both get in potassium, silica, and have a product that acts, excuse me, and functions like an integrated pest management product. Yeah, I mean, intersex, you really don't want intersex characteristics when breeding, but I'll give you a good example. Chemdog D. Dude, if you look at her wrong, she'll throw nanners, right? Now, I haven't ever seen it create full on like hermaphroditic flowers where it's like dropping pollen from a sac, but it will create those little nanners that you see. And sometimes that's just it's usually a stress response. Like if you overfeed it, too much light, it'll just do that. And it's like that thing's been around for decades because it's such a good plant. And so it's been used in breeding, and I use it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the offspring are going to do that, but that's one of the reasons why I test. How do you pre-harvest in DWC? Well, you can't really do a dryback, which is what I like to do pre-harvest. So you just gotta, I would just prune off all the big water leaves and then cut it and hang it, put it in the dry room. Make sure you get some Micro Plus too. It's on sale. If you're picking up some calcium, that is the truth right there. If you combine the calcium silica and the Micro Plus, night and day difference. Yeah, there's nothing really that you could do to reduce moisture in your plants if you're in DWC because you're literally growing in water. So like if like you cut your water off as soon as you do that, it would be essentially just like if you were drying that whole entire plant, right? So there's no drybacks when it comes to DWC. Holy Toledo, he says, I got a pack of you a while ago and got bonus pack of seeds. Purple Cactus wanted to know if they were regs or fems. All of my stuff are regular. I only do traditional male breeding. Like I said, I'll find something that I like and I'll use it. Unless I'm doing like line work, I'll continue using males from that next line. But if I'm doing like for years, I did black line reserve crosses, Limarilla, I did purple punch BLR, I did Bicket BLR, I did white truffle BLR, I did limelight BLR. I just did tons and tons of BLR stuff. Gas, Starfighter, Mac V2 BLRs, all different stuff. Yeah, we later this year we'll be working on the European registration at least for the microbe products, the Micro Plus, all the different spores, and then we're working on right now registration for the EPA to register Beauveria bassiana and Bacillus thuringiensis and the metatarzaneum anaspolate, I believe is how you pronounce it. I could be butchering that. So we're working on some stuff in the background. Here's another question from chat. Do you find yourself turning up your lights after the flip, or do you allow it to stretch into the light naturally? That naturally increasing the PPFD as it grows. Yeah, that's what I typically do. So I do kind of both things. Typically, my veg is a little bit lower, and I'm increasing kind of steadily as I get to a point, and then when I get to about week 6 or 7, depending on flower time, it's usually around week 6, because I usually take things between 52 and 55 days. That's like I like have my stuff perfectly dialed in, and I do some stuff with manganese to help onset flower. And so I don't typically take things like 70 days. 70 days is a little bit long for me. I'm kind of impatient, and I like to have more cycles per year. And so the first thing I let them do is I'll usually turn the light up maybe about like 5%, right, when I flip. And I'm usually only going up in increments of 5% when I'm increasing my LEDs. So I'm starting usually with at 35%, 40% of the 640 watt light. And then when I flip, I increase it 5%, and then I'm letting them grow into it. If I feel like they can handle more light, I might increase it a little bit more. But typically I'm letting them grow up, because as they're increasing in size, the PPFD at the canopy is increasing without me actually doing anything. So the PPFD is going to go up automatically. Then once they are done, that after they're completely done stretching, which for me is usually about 10 to 11 days, because things set pretty fast the way that I do things. And if they're like super close to the light to where I know it's too close, I'll just raise up my light, and then I'll adjust the PPFD, to where I want it to be at that particular point. But yeah, I definitely let them grow, as opposed to, having them grow and increasing things. And, there's a balance when it comes to light, and your plants will let you know. If they're not happy, you'll be like, oh man, these don't look as like lush and vigorous. Turn that light down a little bit. Holy Toledo says, question, I use the Calcil and Microbe Plus. What do you recommend I get next on the list to complement these? I would say the humate fertilizers. So with the 3 of them, there's the, N-humate, which I think most of you guys that are in here are probably already familiar. But N-humate, which is the veg formulation, just 1 part, and you use about 30 milliliters per gallon once every 2 to 4 weeks. If you've got media that's got a lot of stuff in it, like like a living soil, or organic soil, you're using it less frequently, because the cool thing about the fertilizer is it's not just bringing in carbon-based nutrition. All of that fulvic acid, 45% by volume, is pure fulvic acid. And so what it does is it chelates and it binds to all these metal ions. So all your calcium and magnesium and potassium and all your micronutrients, they're all attaching to that fulvic acid, and it's also stimulating the biology. So it causes a cascade event of things happening. So it stimulates biology, which increase the production of secondary metabolites, which improve chelation, nutrient binding, which interfaces. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow, how carbon metabolites interface with nutrient transport. And so it causes a cascade of events. Plus, when the nutrients are actually bound to fulvic acid, they can be passively transported without using any energy, and it's more efficient for the plant to do so. And so, there's the N-humate, there's the complex, which is for transition, and then there's the high potassium formula, which is the K-humate, which has a higher amount of potassium, phosphorus, and it's got less nitrogen than all the other ones. What do you think about the mealworm castings? I had somebody send me some like mealworm frass, which is basically I think when they like molt and stuff like that. Um, and it's like, nutritionally, it's not really going to move the needle much. I know people will say it has things like chitin and stuff like that, which is, what can be beneficial, fungus like chitin. It's a substrate that they like to feed on. Um, it has a small amount of nutrition. It's got a low NPK value. So I typically use meals that I use less of, like blood meal, because it has iron and it's higher nitrogen value. Chubby Chase, what's going on, buddy? Oh, is the mailman here? Hey, Hamilton. Hold on 1 second. I can get the dog. Come here, Chubby. You gotta come here. The mail's here. Sorry about that. I had to put the dog in here. He is a meatball, and he'll just run into people. Is the IQ ordered? No, not yet. Soon, at the end of the month, I'll get it. I usually don't order it until spring. Monty Zoomer says, I did a dryback my last run and it burned my leaf tips. Strange. It's not too strange, but it's concerning it's concentrating the newts. Yeah, it does. So when you have less water, it means that the concentration or the volume to water of nutrients is going to be more, right? So it's like, let's say you start here and you have all this space is, nutrients. Now it might be, let's say it's 1,000 ppm. This is just hypothetical, right? As the water volume shrinks, this is your dryback. The water volume is shrinking. That is getting more concentrated in there. So now it's 2,000 ppm, right? And then it's concentrated, drier back. Now it's 2,500, and we're just being hypothetical, but that's basically how I think about it. And one of the things is like, so when you do drybacks, it can cause osmotic stress, right? And it's because of that. And because of diffusion and concentration gradients outside of both plant cells and out of biology. What can happen is if that concentration gradient gets too high, it starts disrupting cellular membranes. And the reason why is because things always move directionally. And the reason why they do that is because of entropy. And entropy is basically like the least energy state of something. Everything wants to default back to its least, like where it's at rest, essentially. And so when we're talking about diffusion, let's say you have a huge concentration of nutrients, right, that are in solution, and that's the only water that can be accessed. And there's cells over here. And these cells are trying to access this water. And what's happening is those solutes, those things that are in solution, are being forced into their cell, and it's at too high of a concentration of nutrient ions, and it just causes cellular disruption. And the same thing happens with root hairs. And so if you do too high of a dryback, like if you've got a really high ppm of soluble nutrients in your soil or in your media, and you do a hard dryback, you'll typically see that. It's because of that osmotic stress. So you have to be, if you're going to do hard drybacks, the best case scenario is to make sure that you don't have too high of an EC or too high of a ppm of solutes, whether it's in hydroponics or whether it's in your your modified growing mix or your living soil. There's a total amount of bioavailable nutrients, and you can see what those are on things like a saturated paste test, right? And it'll tell you the ppm of all of those. Now, if we're looking at this, right, my total ppm on this on this test. It's 663. I don't know if you guys can see it there. Right there. 663. So that's not super high. It's sufficient and everything is balanced. So if I was to do a dryback on this, I wouldn't see a lot of osmotic stress, because even if it was 50% less water than what it typically has, the ppm would still be over only 1200. It'd be about 1300 something. And so, and another thing is adequate calcium, right? Because calcium should be the main driving nutrient, right? It's usually the highest as far as ppms go in any system. So it can burn. It's because that osmotic stress. Also, another thing too is if you're doing drybacks and you have high sodium, right? Because the sodium concentrations increase, and if those sodium levels are, let's say they're already high, right? Let's say you already have high. Let's say it's okay, but it's on the higher side, and you start doing drybacks, bam, that sodium concentration versus the amount of solution is exponentially larger. And so again, we're causing osmotic stress, sodium stress, and that sodium stress isn't just what we talked about affecting the cells. What's also happening is that sodium stress is pushing things like calcium and magnesium and potassium. It's antagonizing those, pushing them out of solution. It's taking up space on soil colloids, so that way when things do fall into solution. You'd like to get some of the Bicket BLR. I did a drop. I did a special exclusive drop with Clutch, Captain Clutch on IG, and I gave him like, I don't know, 50 packs or something like that. I don't know how many. Maybe it was 25. It was super limited, and I gave all him the packs, and he just never paid me. So I do not have it. All I have is my personal of that. So there's no way for anybody to get it unless you can get it from him. But he still hasn't paid me, so. Oh, I've got something for you. I've got something. I'm going to be taking some clones very soon of the F3 Blueberry Train Mac Blueberry Haze Pheno. Hoo-wee. There's a comment and says, on your recommendations, I started adding EM. I highly recommend Micro Plus over EM. One, it's less expensive, it's more efficient, it has a higher CFU and a higher diversity of microbes. Just FYI, put you up on game. So somebody in the comments are asking about how I look at ripeness. So I'm looking at the plant. I'm not using a microscope to judge trichomes, because if your trichomes are amber, it's because they're oxidizing. And I like to get at peak ripeness before things start to oxidize, because that oxidation process is also going to occur during the dry cure process. So I'm looking mainly at the stigma. Once the pistils turn or once they dry out, they can no longer accept pollen. Once they're around 80%, that's a pretty good indication that that plant has reached sexual maturity, right? Because that plant can no longer accept pollen, because the pistils are dried out. So I look at that, and then I'm looking at the senescence. If I've done everything right and correctly and haven't overfed, and I haven't given, and it's not too much light, because there are conditions where, like, if you spray and flower something, you could dry out those stigma, and it looks like, but the plant is still going to grow past that. So it's conditional as well. I mean, I obviously, I'm not spraying in flower past like week 2, because I do the trichoderma and bacillus spray right when they start setting after they bolt. And senescence. So looking at the given all the nutrition is right, which it usually is, because I test, the plants will start to naturally fade. They'll stop producing chlorophyll, and you'll see the fall colors come through. So you'll see, like, if it's carotenoids, you'll see yellows and oranges. If it's anthocyanin, you'll usually see blues and violets and purples. What is the difference between your microbe plus and root wise? I have no idea. But I can tell you this: all of our stuff is super concentrated, because whether you're buying the bacillus or trichoderma, there's no carrier. It's just pure spores. So you're not getting a bunch of talc powder. And then this is super concentrated. We make this in-house. We do all the QC, quality control. That's why it hasn't changed over the last 5 years. We make from pure spores, quality, and do the fermentation. And so I think the difference is, they're probably using spores and talc powder, and ours is in solution. But the benefit to ours is this: it goes through fermentation. So all of the carbohydrate that we use gets turned into secondary metabolites, like organic acids, things that biofilms, pelesyl. There's all these different things, phytohormones, enzymes, along with all of the different species. So what happens is they'll consume all of that carbohydrate, they'll produce metabolites, they'll convert those metabolites into, beneficial compounds for the soil and plant, and those are in the bottle as well. You're also getting all of the fungus and the bacteria, photosynthetic bacteria, yeast, lactic acid bacteria, bacillus subtilis, and it's super concentrated. If you look at the CFUs and you go on, we're required to take this and send it out to a lab when we do our label registration. And so if you look at the back, when you're looking at species of microbes, what you need to be looking at is the CFU per gram, right? So Lactobacillus plantarum, this is 3.5 times 10 to the 7th power. So 3.5, no, it's 35 million CFU per milliliter. We're talking about per milliliter. Another lactic acid bacteria, which is lactic acid, Lactobacillus casei, 5.9 times 10 to the 7. There's the Pseudomonas, and on here it's 1 times 10 to the 8th. Those are the amount of colony forming units. So either spores or live bacteria that will colonize and procreate your substrate per milliliter. And if you look at the total volume, there's so much. And the same thing with the spores. The trichoderma is 200 billion CFU per gram. If you go and try to find products on the market that have a higher concentration or higher CFU, you're not going to do it. And the reason why is because if you're using any of the commercially available mycorrhizal products, inoculants, there's a carrier. And if you want to look at it, it'll say contains 99.9% other. It'll say active ingredient, and it'll list the CFU count, and then it'll say 99% other. And that other is basically, they don't have to list it. It's talc powder. They just use an inert soluble powder as a carrier, as a delivery system. I just do pure spores. The manganese trick. Arden Lovett says, I love all the info. Can you explain on the manganese trick? So iron is more of a photosynthetic. Okay, iron and manganese, they have a really close relationship. Okay, and it's because they basically have the same redox state and the same kind of energy mechanics, and they also they take up the same spaces on the surfaces of clay colloids, and they compete against each other. So if you have too much of one, you won't get enough of the other, right? They're like there's always a constant. They're like a sibling rivalry, you could kind of call it, between iron and manganese. Now, iron is more considered like a photosynthetic nutrient, more of a generative veg type nutrient. And it's needed for redox states in the plants. It's needed for electron transfer. It's needed in all these different metabolic systems. And the reason why it's needed in a higher quantity than any other micronutrient is because of the energy states, right? It oxidizes super easy. So it'll offer off its energy really easy. And that needs to happen for like enzymes and coenzymes and like things to function and like work together. There has to be energy transfer, right? And so that's one of the main jobs of iron is these energy transfer dynamics, right? And these energy transfer metabolic processes. Now, manganese is not needed in as high a quantity as iron, even though manganese can do some of the same things that iron does, and they have this rivalry. But manganese is more of a flowering element. It's used for more processes and metabolically that are involved in reproduction, right? And so what we have found out is that typically we're trying to run iron optimally at 1 ppm in solution. If you can keep iron, which is really difficult to do, right? Unless you're using EDTA chelated iron, which obviously you're not doing that if you're growing organic. Iron it oxidizes super easy, but if you can keep it at like 1 ppm, that's optimal. Typically, I'm seeing it between let's see, 0.5 and 0.8, which is still really good. If you're hitting half a ppm, you're still adequate. But like if you really want to be like banging out, 1 ppm. Now, manganese isn't used in as large quantities, but when you flip, right, if you increase the manganese level to about equal of iron, so typically I'm running manganese at about 0.35 ppm, right, of solution. Now, if I get that up and I go up to 0.6, so if I can double the manganese and then make it equal, let's say if we're sitting at 0.8 ppm, we just doubled our manganese right at that point and brought it higher up to iron. So it might decrease that iron just slightly because, again, they're siblings and they're bickering and going back and forth. And they're not really siblings. I'm just using this as an analogy to help you guys understand. But since it's responsible for all of these metabolic processes that are, for flowering and for reproduction, when you increase those levels, I don't know what the science is behind it, but I'm hypothesizing that it's just upregulating and stimulating some of those hormonal processes that have to do with flowering. And what I've seen is that the onset of flowering occurs much faster. And it's and it's, you know, I've seen this with the products. Like I'll give you a good example. I can harvest between usually day 49 and day 55 on almost everything that that I have. And I have things like ChemDog, right? And like most people are taking ChemDog like 60 days, maybe 63 days. Some people are taking a little bit longer. I can't. I physically can't take it longer than 7-8 weeks. And the reason why is because they're finishing faster as well. And it's not sacrificing yield, it's just creating a faster onset. So, and the thing is, like, my nitrogen and calcium levels are also really balanced in these systems. And the reason why I do that is because I don't get the stretching, right? So I like nice, short, squatty plants. That way I keep my light is penetrating lower, right? If my plants are getting really long, then okay, I might have 12 inches of good, or maybe 8 inches of really nice, you know, canopy penetration, but then all of this isn't getting anything unless I'm using under canopy. But if my plants aren't going through that much of a stretch and they're staying shorter and stockier, and then what they're doing is they're starting to flower faster, I'm not sacrificing any yield because I'm getting better light penetration. So I'm getting more consistency in the actual flower structure, and I'm finishing faster. So I'm not sacrificing. I'm not getting more yield, but I'm not sacrificing any yield either. So manganese is a, you know, I use manganese sulfate, and I look at this. I look at what my levels are on a saturated paste test, and I adjust it, because what's happening is, like today, I'm going to be taking soil samples, right? Because I just harvested. I should have done it a week ago, but I was procrastinating. But what I'll do is when I get that test back, I'm going to be able to look at what those levels are. And if they're not where they need to be, bam, they're getting hit with that manganese. Make sure that when I flip, because I'm actually going to be vegging for a couple of weeks. So I won't even have to do the manganese. So it's not even that important that I didn't test a week ago, because I'm going to be transplanting. I'm going to hit them with a little N-humate, probably half strength. And then by the time I get my soil tests back, it'll be 5 days, and I'll be able to know exactly what I need to do moving forward. Here's another good question. So this is from the chat, and it says, when you mix soil, do you base your ppms on total exchange capacity of the soil, or are you just trying to hit a set ppm? So this is the thing. When you're looking at a modified growing mix, right here on a standard soil test, let me see if I can pull this up. It'll show you the EC. It'll show you the total EC and the percent of organic matter. It is, I'm trying to get it. Well, damn, you can't see it, but it says it's 10.40 EC on this, which is actually pretty low for a lot of these mixes. And if it's at 10 EC, you know that this is a modified mix, like a peat or cocoa base, and not like an agronomic outdoor soil. And then what we're looking at is this. So we're looking at standard soil. So we want to make sure that all of these different nutrients are in balance. But the bigger picture for when you're making soil is the balance in the ppm of every nutrient. So a good example, this was a test that I did, and I believe this was for something that I was going to reset. I have a pH of 6.6. My total overall ppm of total available nutrients was 663. Okay. There was 31 parts per million of sulfur. There was 6 parts per million of phosphorus, which is more than adequate. I've seen people run it at 1 ppm as long as it's always cycling and available. Calcium is at 97, which is 50% adequate. It should be at 200. Magnesium is at 29 ppm. It should be at 32, between 32 and 40. And then potassium was at 96, which is pretty adequate. It could do increase by 25 to 50 ppm if you wanted to. And then you have your micronutrients, right? So 0.11 boron, 0.42 iron, 0.05 manganese, 0.07 copper, 0.3 zinc. This is what we're looking at. We're making sure that these are all sufficient. So we're making sure that there's enough of, like, when we're looking at the soil report, okay, it says here copper is at 5.3 ppm, which is adequate for soil, standard soil. Over here, it's 0.07 ppm, which is also adequate for copper as a micronutrient. So they're both sufficient and nothing would need to be done. But we're basing all of our inputs off of the data when we're manufacturing soil. Simple Man says, fed with water and 30 mils Micro Plus this morning and just checked and fuck about 3 inches in 8 hours. Dude, that Micro Plus, dude, it's the business. I'm telling you, I don't grow without it. It's a staple. It's one of the foundations in my program. Any skunk in the vault? No. I'm about to pop some seeds. I'm cycling some stuff. Again, doing a turnover, waiting to do some sex testing. Once I get those loaded, it'll be another 2 weeks. I'll pop some more. Train skunk cut cross to Starfighter Mac. I can't wait. I can't wait for this. This is going to be so good. This is a super, super limited release. There was less than 40 packs of this. And I took a good quantity of it myself. So those, I mean, they won't be released for, I don't know, maybe 4, even 5 months from now, but no skunk right now. I'm going to be taking some skunk cut clones here. Trying to, I might do it tonight. Actually, I might take clones tonight. Here's another question from Matthew Jerome. What one additive do you think is overhyped and growers could do without? I would probably say one of the most overhyped thing is bloom boosters. Bloom boosters, you should never be feeding your plant with high NPK values, high concentration fertilizers late stage. It is just going to totally ruin the flavor and the smokability of that flower. You should have adequate nutrition throughout and not be like, oh, I'm going to try to add a bunch of potassium phosphate and magnesium and Epsom salt together, you know, late in flowering because I think it's going to make things better. It's not. What can I do to tell the difference between calcium deficiency and disease? Yeah, well, you know, calcium deficiency is pretty like definitive. It usually comes up as like spotting on the plant. One thing is this. I've never seen calcium toxicity. I have seen calcium imbalance, which can cause lockout, but I've never seen calcium toxicity. The plant will use up as much calcium as it can. I went out to Northern California and I tested, did leaf tissue analysis on the Mendo Dope Boys outdoors, and they had higher calcium levels in anything that I have ever seen in my life. They were almost hitting 9% calcium. Now, look at if you're banging like hemp recommendations is about 2.5% to 3% calcium. I say 4.5 to 5.5 is like you're gonna bang some serious, you know, healthy plants and like, you know, if it, obviously everything else needs to be on point too. These guys had almost 9%, 4%, 3.5% higher than what I typically see on my indoor, which was really interesting. They cannot get and I've never seen it. Shouldn't say they can't, but I've never seen plants get. So if you're thinking it's calcium deficiency, add some calcium, add a little bit of gypsum, test it out. More is less. See how they react. Here's a question. When I mix up Epsom for a foliar, how long can I use that for? If it's just Epsom salt in water, I mean, if it doesn't smell bad, it's safe to use. If it doesn't smell bad, it's safe to use. The thing is, once it starts to smell bad, what's happening is that there's sulfur reducing bacteria, which are anaerobic, and they reduce. Oh, no, that's not right. That's not right because the sulfate's already reduced. Just as long as it's not, just as long as it doesn't smell bad. If it doesn't go anaerobic, then it's safe to use. But here's the thing: if you're using something like Kiaha or Yucca as a surfactant, it'll go bad much quicker because the biology will start to grow in there. Microbes will start to grow in there really quickly. Yeah. Oh, here, look at Rusty Nails just as I was scrolling, I saw his comment. It says minerals don't go bad, not like lab. Yeah. If you have something added to it, be careful. But if it doesn't smell bad, you're good to go. This is a really clever. This is a clever question from Matthew Jerome. Could the dryback be beneficial if you've overused nitrogen and want to get it out of the soil rather than flushing? Yep, absolutely. Yeah, because here's the thing: people don't realize this, but a natural part of nitrogen cycling is the off gas in the conversion of nitrates and ammonium into atmospheric nitrogenous gases. So drybacks can do that. It can slow because what it does is what's happening is let's say you're cycling organic matter really fast and you're liberating too much of the organic meals that you put down too quickly. So too much nitrogen is getting liberated. When you dry back, what's happening is you're going to slow down the ability for the microbes to procreate and produce those metabolites, access to water, right? And so it'll move what's already there, um, relationship to carbon. So like you can do a couple things where like you could tie nitrogen up by adding more carbon and then doing a dry back. But that nitrogen, if it's attached to carbon, it's not going to convert into atmospheric gas. And when we're talking about the conversion into atmospheric gas, it's not like, oh, I over fertilized, I need to dry back, and then I'm going to lose 50% of my nitrogen. You know, you like the release rate and conversion of nitrogen sources into atmospheric nitrogen it's contingent on a bunch of different factors. Is there an issue with the site? People have been asking me if there has been some issues. I know that the site has a hard time working on Safari, but on Google and everything else, it might be running a little bit slow. Actually, I'm pulling it up on my phone right now. Let me check and see. Ooh, you might be right. You might be right about that. Let's see, it's taking forever to load. I will check on that right after this live. which I should probably just do right now. Man, I'm so far behind in the comments. Make sure you guys come back on. I'll do another live tomorrow. We are going to be live at 5:30 for the Dirt on Growing podcast. And I'll work on it right now. I'll get on it. I'll see you guys soon.